with another video for you today, and today I've got another alternatives video. It seems you guys are enjoying these alternatives themed videos, and today I'm giving you alternatives of one of my favorite gourmand fragrances, Intense Cafe from Montale. There's 5 here, although there are more out there in the world that could be alternatives to this fragrance. I've got 5 in my collection and I'm going to let you know what they are. And this video is not necessarily alternatives that are less expensive, just alternatives of that particular fragrance that you can have if you love this particular one, Intense Cafe, so much, you might dig into, you know, finding some alternatives that might go into little different directions. Either way, 5 alternatives of Montale's Intense Cafe coming right up. Thanks so much for tuning in. This is Sebastian with Smelling Great Fragrance Reviews. Yesterday I'm talking about Montale's Intense Cafe, a fragrance I discovered back in 2014. It was launched in 2013. It was an instant love at first sniff. I just loved the combination of the gourmand, lactonic or milky kind of qualities of Intense Cafe contrasted with the rose. It was a very, very new smell for me back then, and I still enjoy it to this day. It's one of my favorite fragrances. I've turned it on to so many people throughout the journey of my fragrance hobby, and many people have fallen in love with it. And in fact, I've actually ordered bottles for these friends and relatives that wanted to end up with this fragrance, who know nothing about you know, the niche perfume world, but had very much interest in this fragrance. So today, as I said, I've got alternatives for you, 5 of them, for Montale's Intense Cafe. But before I get to the alternatives, if this is your first time tuning into my channel and you still haven't subscribed, please do click the subscribe button below and also click the bell so that you'll be notified for future videos and giveaways. So I originally shot this video back during the lockdown, like deep into the lockdown, like end of March, very early April. So since I don't have my collection of fragrances in my own home, it's in the studio. I came to the studio when it was nobody allowed to go out. I came here and there was nobody in this office building, and I was a little scared. So the video was shot, but I never aired it because I didn't really like the way it turned out during that really intense period of lockdown here. But here it is, I'm doing it all over again, and this one's definitely airing. So how many of you are fans of Intense Cafe? Do you enjoy this particular fragrance? Are you a fan of Montale's fragrances? So there are alternatives of this fragrance. Yes, people or brands have actually not necessarily copied it, but like, you know, kind of came up with their own unique twists to it. In fact, Montale's sister company has a fragrance that's similar to this that was even launched 2 years prior. I won't get to that until I get to a few others first, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about Intense Cafe. It is a 2013 launch. I would call this floral amber fragrance. This is lots of ambery touches, but that's a kind of what it settles down to. But it's lots of rose, vanilla, coffee, musk, floral notes, and amber is what they credit. And even though there's coffee here, coffee is not so prominent. It's not really intense. More like a very light coffee latte with rose and sweet notes kind of a thing. I'm a coffee drinker and I like my coffee to be intense. I like the flavor of coffee, the most robust kind of intense flavors, not the weak kinds whatsoever. And this I would call like a very light, very, very light coffee latte. So the coffee is almost not prominent. Usually when I drink lattes, which is like lots of milk with like a little shot of very light coffee, to me it doesn't really act like coffee, and that's how I get experience with this particular fragrance. But it's lots of rose and lots of vanilla. It is definitely musky, and you know, there are some light floral notes under there. I'm thinking something like light jasmine, light magnolia, maybe even light tuberose, but it's kind of like a fusion of different floral notes that are not too distinguishable. And then of course it does settle to that amber fragrance. It is really, really delicious, and as I said, once people smell it, they really end up wanting to buy a bottle. In fact, at one time I had a small little gathering with some lady friends, and 2 ladies there ended up getting a bottle. Like, they just loved it so much, and that's what I was wearing that day for a fragrance. This is like several years ago, but it's just the reactions to this fragrance is really positive. Anyway, that's my thoughts on the fragrance we have, or I have alternatives for. And the first alternative I'm going to go ahead and let you know about is a fragrance from Montale, which is called Ristretto Intense Cafe. This original one came out in 2013, and 6 years later they came out with Ristretto Intense Cafe in 2019. And this is the more coffee version of Intense Cafe. If you like the idea of Intense Cafe, coffee, rose, milky, things like that, amber, floral, musk, definitely try this one if you want more of a prominent coffee experience. And even though it has a more of a prominent coffee experience, it's definitely stand out. You do experience everything else very similar to what Intense Cafe is all about. So 2019 launch for the Ristretto Intense Cafe. Got notes of coffee, rose, vanilla, caramel, musk, amber, woodsy notes. Yes, it does settle to a little more of a woodsy experience, but the coffee is more prominent. You definitely experience more coffee here. This to me is more like a cappuccino with the coffee standing out more in comparison to latte, which is more milk and coffee, if that makes sense. So I like this additional version of Intense Cafe, but don't get me wrong, I'm still a big fan of the original. That was my very first love. I really love the gooiness of that one. It's very cozy and comforting, you know. It's just all syrupy, gooey, ambery, you know, very flowy. Whereas here, the coffee adds a little bit of a dryness to the experience because, you know, you were dealing with kind of coffee grounds experience. It's coffee grounds experience and also kind of like an actual, you know, how the espresso shot comes out from the machine, kind of an experience. So you have a fusion of liquid coffee and then also some dried coffee in here along with the other notes. I think it's a great version of Intense Cafe. It depends on what you want. If you want a latte Intense Cafe, then go with the original. If you want a cappuccino Intense Cafe, go with the Ristretto Intense Cafe. So that's my first alternative for Intense Cafe. The second alternative I'm going to go ahead and give you is the sister company of Montale, which is Mancera. It's Roses Vanille. Now, Roses Vanille had come out in 2011. Intense Cafe came out in 2013. So I guess I really didn't jump at this, really didn't, until I discovered Montale's Intense Cafe. In fact, several years I wore Intense Cafe, then I kind of discovered this. I first discovered Intense Cafe in 2014, and I believe I discovered this probably a year and a half later, like in 2015 sometime, which I thought, wow, this is very similar. So this is not called Intense Cafe, or there's no word of coffee in here, but they do have similarities as a smell goes. Roses Vanille features notes of vanilla, rose, sugar, musk, woody notes, lemon, and water. So different notes, but still I think we have the rose, we have the sugary touches here, and we have the vanilla. So those are what's really kind of you know, playing around together to kind of remind us of my love, Intense Cafe. But there are different touches here. There's some light woods that come through, light, very light, and there is that kind of a watery thing happening in here as well. But you know, if it's a great alternative to Montale's Intense Cafe. But if you already have Montale's Intense Cafe, you don't need something similar. I'd say stick with that. If you want more fragrances that are similar, definitely check this one out, because if your nose is kind of developed, you'll notice some nuances that are a little different than Intense Cafe. They're not identical, but they do smell similar, and that's why I'm offering it up as an alternative. And the fact that, you know, this came before Intense Cafe, you know, Intense Cafe gets all the, you know, the hype because everybody seems to like it, but you know, Montale's sister company Mancera had a fragrance called Roses Vanille, which kind of smelled similar. So Roses Vanille is a great alternative for Montale's Intense Cafe. And so let me know if you've tried all three of these fragrances: Intense Cafe, the original, Ristretto Intense Cafe, and Roses Vanille. Are you a fan of them? Have you compared the three together? Especially since they are sister companies and they're related. How do you compare them? Do you see any similarities, differences? Let me know, put a comment down so I can find out. Okay, the next fragrance is also somewhat similar to the previous three, although between Ristretto Intense Cafe and the other two, Intense Cafe and Roses Vanille, I feel like Ristretto Intense Cafe is a lot different, even though they smell similar, a lot different than Intense Cafe and Roses Vanille. But here we have something similar from a totally different brand called Delox from Tiziana Terenzi. This to me is, you know, when you first spray it, it's totally like Intense Cafe, Roses Vanille, totally. Even though they mentioned there's coffee here, the coffee is not as prominent as the coffee in Ristretto Cafe, even though the coffee is mentioned here. It's more of a, I don't know. I'm a coffee snob, so I know a lot about coffee. I love my coffees to be really, really robust and strong and really, really deep, rich flavors. I don't like weak coffee. I just have never been into watery coffee. So I don't get that robust coffee experience here, like that really deep, rich, very, very intense flavor. We're talking about smell, but I'm talking about flavor and smell at the same time. So it is more of a coffee latte experience, more latte than coffee here. But again, it's sprayed on, very similar to Intense Cafe and Roses Vanille, but this fragrance does change. It does get a lot woodier, and the woods come through a lot more. So there is a difference here, even though when you first spray it, it's, you know, acting like it is, but then it gets develops into something different, but still reminding you of Intense Cafe and Roses Vanille. So Delox features notes of rose, coffee, musk, honey, vanilla, hyacinth, amber, apopanax, cedar, iris. A lot of different notes. And one other thing that's really, really prominent with this particular fragrance in comparison to the other three that I just spoke to you about, this is Extrait de Parfum. This is extremely long-lasting in comparison to the others. And the others are definitely long-lasting. They're not like wimps or anything. But Tiziana and Terenzi fragrances are all Extrait de Parfum, meaning higher concentration of perfume oils. They're going to stick on you a lot longer. And this definitely does. But just keep in mind, it does develop, it does change. It does get a lot woodier. I can totally pick out the woodiness. Definitely not picking out like really intense, robust coffee note. But I think it's a great alternative for Intense Cafe. If you've kind of been wearing Intense Cafe a lot, you want a little change, you want more woody experience, then try Delox from Tiziana Terenzi. I think it's a great scent. I love this combination of notes. I just think they're really, really delicious combination of, you know, rose and coffee latte kind of thing. I really dig it. So Delox from Tiziana Terenzi is a great, great alternative. Now the next fragrance I'm going to talk to you about is from the house of Atelier Cologne. This is Cafe Tuberosa. Oh, one more thing I should say about Delox. Delox came out in 2017, and also Atelier Cologne Cafe Tuberosa came out in 2017. So here we have something going in a different direction finally. Like, you'll get the hints of Intense Cafe, but this is a lot drier experience, not milky whatsoever. So you're looking at a dry ground coffee experience with drip coffee without any milk experience. So yes, it'll remind you of Intense Cafe, but there's a lot more going on here. In addition to the coffee, there's cacao, there's a little bit of a chocolatey touch, but what also stands out here is tuberose. Tuberose, beautiful, beautiful tuberose here. Really beautiful contrast to the roses with the coffee and the cacao. Very, very stand out, and I like this combination, and it is a great, great alternative in contrast to Intense Cafe or the other fragrances I spoke to you about. Going back to Ristretto Intense Cafe, here it's the experience is a lot more ground coffee, and here it's totally like amplified, like lots of ground coffee in addition to the milkiness here. There's no milkiness here. We are getting a little bit of a milky touch from the tuberose. I always get milkiness, creaminess from white flowers. It's there, but to me this is more of a dried coffee experience. So the notes are coffee, cacao, tuberose, rose, vanilla, cardamom, bergamot, orange. What a beautiful combination. This is probably one of my favorite fragrances from this house. I just love the combination, and it is a great change of pace from Intense Cafe, where it's all milky, you know, lactonic experience, creamy experience. Here, it's not any of that. It's drier. There is a little bit of an ambery touch. Don't think that there isn't here. It's there, but it's more of a dry experience. But beautiful combination. And I really, really love the tuberose addition here. It's really, really stand out, and it's a beautiful contrast to the rose, the cacao, and the coffee. Highly recommend this one too. Number 4, Atelier Cologne Cafe Tuberosa. If you don't know that one, do check it out. I really, really think it's a great scent. And my 5th and final alternative to Intense Cafe from Montale. We're going to an Italian house called Carthusia, and it's Terra Mia. So different here. This is more closer to something like Cafe Tuberosa rather than Intense Cafe, but when you're wearing the fragrance, you experience that kind of reminder of smelling like Intense Cafe because the notes kind of have similarities. The notes here are coffee, hazelnuts, vanilla, rose, amberwood, orange blossom, neroli, ambroxan, pink pepper, jasmine, bergamot, musk. Lots of stuff going on here. So it's a coffee hazelnut nutty combo with the vanilla and rose, and this is not milky whatsoever. Once again, we're dealing with ground coffee and drip coffee in combination with the hazelnuts, vanilla, and rose, and it's gorgeous. It's really, really gorgeous to wear. You do experience a little bit of the amber wood, and then the orange blossom and neroli comes in here. Unlike here where we had tuberose, we're getting citrus floral, white floral notes in here, which is a nice contrast as well. There's a little bit of a spice here, and it's all musky. And you know, the jasmine, I don't get much jasmine in here, although maybe a little bit, not too much, because I'm getting more of the neroli and orange blossom rather than the jasmine, but it's lightly under there. But a beautiful fragrance. I think it's definitely a great alternative. And once again, if you're tired of the lactonic creaminess of Intense Cafe, Ristretto Intense Cafe, Delox, then this is, or even Rose's Vanille, then this is a great, great alternative. It's super beautiful and different, and that nuttiness from the hazelnuts adds a unique, you know, experience to the fragrance that you're familiar with the Intense Cafe, but now it's completely dry, ground, drip coffee with nuts and vanilla, rose, and things like that. So that's my final offering or alternative for Intense Cafe, Carthusia's Terra. I do want to offer up one more alternative. The House of Oud has a fragrance called Grape Pearls. Are you guys familiar with this one? Even though I don't have it here, I have smelled it in passing before. It did remind me of Intense Cafe. So that's an other alternative in case you want to check that fragrance out. As I said, I don't have it here, but it did remind me of Intense Cafe when I was smelling it in passing. But there is also one other fragrance that kind of hints at Intense Cafe. That's called Delina from Parfums of Marly. For some reason, that fragrance, they're not identical whatsoever. It's totally fruity in comparison to no fruits in Intense Cafe. Lightly under there kind of hints at kind of a milky, rosy Intense Cafe reminder. Do you guys get this from Delina? Let me know, put a comment down. And again, they're not identical fragrances whatsoever because they're completely different, but the rose and the milkiness of Delina kind of hints at Intense Cafe. So anyway, that's also an alternative in case you like the fruity idea of Delina. But either way, guys, let me know if you have a favorite alternative to Intense Cafe. Are there others that I should know about? Put a comment down so I can find out. Do you know the fragrances I discussed with you today? Have you tried them? Have you compared them? Do they compare to Intense Cafe? Let me know. Put a comment down so I can find out. Either way, I appreciate you tuning in today to watch this alternatives video to Montale's Intense Cafe. If you have any questions or comments, please list below. Please like this video. Please share it. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and I'll be back with more videos very soon. Have a good one. Goodbye. Thanks so much for sticking around. I do want to also let you know if you have any alternatives, ideas that you want me to work on, please put a comment down here, or better yet, send an email to lfsgquestions@gmail.com. Any fragrance videos you want me to do that are alternatives theme, alternatives video of a specific fragrance, whether it's discontinued or not, let me know. I'd like to see what you guys want me to work on, and I'll get cracking on working on those videos. There's so many fragrances out there, whether discontinued where we want alternatives or not discontinued. In this case here, this is definitely not a discontinued fragrance, and all the fragrances that I offered up as alternatives are not discontinued. Now I know I did this really quickly after the last week's alternatives, well, not last week's, was it last week? It was last week. Alternatives video to Jazz Club. If you haven't watched that video, alternatives to Maison Margiela's Jazz Club, go catch that. And these particular two videos are alternatives that are similar. I can do alternatives to fragrances that don't have any similar fragrances as well. I've done in the past as well. But here in this case, they are alternatives, and they're not less expensive alternatives. Maybe there will be some less expensive alternatives in future videos, but either way, let me know if you want me to work on anything specific alternatives videos wise. Send it to lfsgquestions@gmail.com. And this video came so fast after the Jazz Club video, and as I said, this one was planned right during the lockdown, and the video I shot then just didn't work out, but glad it's here now that you guys can see. And again, thanks so much for tuning in today.